For as long as I can remember, I have been in love with stories. Legends, folklore, and tales of magic and mystery always brought me a sense of wonder and soon became my favorites. In my mind, those types of stories always made the world more magical and life just seemed more fun that way. Welcome to Art and Lore.
In Valhalla, one of the 12 regions of Asgard, a great and highly revered god sits and ponders. Having only one eye, he's left with a myopic view of the world. But being who he is, physical eyesight isn't necessary. The information he seeks doesn't come from physical senses alone. No, sensory information isn't near enough. Stroking his beard, he waits for his 2 pets to return and whisper to him about all that they have observed that day. These messengers are cunning, clever, observant, and, thanks to his powers, can speak and understand human language. They will counsel him upon their return and remind him of all the things his failing memory may have left by the wayside. His messengers, 2 ravens named Huginn and Muninn, have the ability to circle throughout all of Midgard and Earth in a single day, bringing back indispensable knowledge and offering wisdom beyond what any mortal could provide. Still, it isn't enough. Odin, the god who awaits his corvid counsel, knows what waits beyond, at least in part. It doesn't take physical sight to know it's coming, nor does it take any special wisdom. All the gods of Asgard know that one day the end will come in the form of Ragnarok, a cosmic end for them, but the mere birthing pains of a new cosmos for the universe. Still, Odin has much to lose when this occurs. His life, for one, but more troublesome than that, his son. In order to understand Odin's ravens, you have to understand Odin himself. If all you really know about him is that he has one eye, a bad memory, 2 ravens, and a couple of wolves, nobody could blame you. Unless you're really into mythology, that's about all anyone ever hears of this god of war and death. But Odin's story is actually quite fascinating. It's the story of a man more than a god. A man whose endless pursuit for ever-deepening knowledge drew him into some of the most harrowing adversity suffered by any of the Norse gods. That eye he lost? He didn't exactly lose it, but we'll get to that later. This story, after all, is not so much about Odin as it is about his ravens. But, as I said, you need to understand how badly Odin craved knowledge, particularly about the future, and with what fervor he held on to control. No sooner would he obtain one source of knowledge than he was unfulfilled and after still more wisdom. It wouldn't be entirely wrong to call Odin desperate, and who wouldn't be? After all, with the cosmic Armageddon of Ragnarok approaching, told in every prophecy, song, and story, why wouldn't the Allfather, the god of war, the most revered deity perhaps in all Norse culture, cling tightly to his role and his existence? Being a member of the Aesir, one might think Odin would already have the ability to obtain all the knowledge he could want. After all, the deities within the Aesir had the gift of foreknowledge, with which they could look far into the future. And yet, for Odin, it was not enough. It was never enough. The information about Ragnarok lay somewhere in the shadow beyond the light, visible only in shape, for all the Aesir knew it was coming, but never clear enough to grasp. When those dark days come, though, They will be ushered in by an event perhaps more personally devastating to Odin than the end of all the cosmos and the doom of the gods itself, the death of his son. Ragnarok, and all the knowledge regarding it that might allow him to save his son, if not himself, sat on the horizon, never closer, an elusive rainbow whose pot of gold he would never reach. But oh, how he tried. Sensing these dark days ahead, Odin was a god driven nearly mad by his ever more desperate quest for knowledge beyond what the sight of the Aesir could offer him. He would eventually pluck out his own eye, journey to harrowing places, and eventually hang himself from Yggdrasil, the ash tree, all in desperate pursuit of knowledge that constantly lay just beyond the light of prophecy. When it comes to the ravens, it turns out that quite a lot is in a name. Huginn is typically translated as thought, while Muninn is translated as mind. There's a poem that's often recited when it comes to Odin's own thoughts about the two ravens. Benjamin Thorpe's translation is as follows, quote, "Huginn and Muninn fly each day over the spacious earth. I fear for Huginn that he come not back, yet more anxious am I for Muninn." End quote. In a practical and immediate sense, these words reflect a basic care that Odin has for his pets and counselors. After all, they are his eyes and ears, his wisdom bearers in many ways, and an indispensable part of his life. Without them, who could estimate the amount of knowledge and observation he would lose about the realms under his control? But since Huginn is thought and Muninn is the mind, there are symbolic reasons for having concern over both, in particular for the latter. Huginn, as thought, may represent the ability to reason, to think. The thoughts in our minds control most of what we do. Without thinking, we cannot act, we cannot know, and for someone as singularly obsessed with knowledge as Odin, it doesn't take much to realize why losing his ability to think would frighten him. But Muninn represents the mind, and with it, memory. For a god as notoriously forgetful as Odin, losing one's memory would be more horrifying still. What if he forgot all the information he was gathering? What if every time he sacrificed to obtain knowledge that would expand the light of foresight just a bit further, he lost it? Since Huginn and Muninn are also associated with shamanism, there's also a fitting symbolism here that represents the danger shamans assume whenever they send their minds into realms unknown. The risk that part or all of your mind never returns to you is very real, especially when, like in the case of Odin, you split that consciousness into two beings. Still more, Odin's desire to put his thought and mind into two birds who can see more than he can and can travel beyond his reach, bringing him back information he otherwise may not be able to obtain, and his concern for them, is still yet another way in which Odin communicates his desperate need for control and knowledge. We'd be remiss to talk about Odin's ravens without discussing raven symbology in general in the Norse world. Odin himself is often referred to as the raven god, and yes, it's mostly because of Huginn and Muninn. But it's not just because of that. It's also because of what ravens represented. For one, ravens were seen as highly intelligent, a truth that holds to this day. The average raven has the intelligence of the average 7-year-old human, and that is impressive. This, of course, is in line with a god seeking knowledge. But beyond that, ravens were also excellent wayfinders. Viking warriors were said to have sent ravens ahead of their ships. If the ravens returned, they would continue on. But if the ravens did not return, that was a sign that land was nearby, and they would point their ships in that direction. Ravens were also intricately linked with war, and given that Odin was not just the Allfather, but a god of war and death, and the protector of lost soldiers in Valhalla, this also made sense. The website Norse Mythology for Smart People describes this connection. Quote, "Ravens, as carrion birds, were present when a battle took place and were some of its prime beneficiaries. To slay someone in battle was, in a sense, to give the ravens a gift. Countless kennings express this concept. To cite but two, the warrior is the feeder of the raven and the fattener of the battle starling. But the gift of a dead man also went to Odin, due to his role as the ruler of the dead in Valhalla, and the common practice of symbolically sacrificing an enemy host to Odin before a battle." End quote. These corvids were also associated with protection and help, as well as a few other traits and characteristics. As intricately linked as ravens are to Norse mythology, and as closely related to knowledge and prophecy as they are, it's no surprise that Odin, being the raven god, would be looked to for knowledge and help, especially in the heat of battle, or at least for a safe refuge for the soul after falling on the battlefield. What's interesting, though, is that the same god who is looked to for protection, help, and wisdom is fraught with anxiety over never having enough of these things himself. He helps others, but cannot seem to find the help he needs. He protects others, but cannot find a way to protect what he cares most about. He offers wisdom, but can never attain enough knowledge and understanding for himself. And in that pursuit, he loses his own life in an attempt to save it. Perhaps this is why Odin himself is so loved and relatable. How many of us feel that we can offer what we cannot obtain, that we are looked to provide the help we never receive ourselves? And perhaps this is why his ravens, Huginn and Muninn, are so well loved and revered. Perhaps to us, as to Odin, they represent the two things that make us who we are: our ability to think, our thoughts themselves, and our mind. The fear of losing one's mind is not a unique fear. It's nearly ubiquitous. If we're honest, it might be the fear we all hold most deeply and feel most intensely. Without our minds, after all, who are we? What can we protect? What can we communicate? What control do we have? Do we even cease to exist without our minds? In our own pursuit to understand that which we cannot seem to grasp, and our own desire to hold on to the minds that contain those intangible components of our consciousness without which we would cease to be, we have developed an affection for Odin and his ravens. In a twist of irony, we now use our own thoughts and minds to preserve the story of the god who feared his own obsolescence, as we do ours. In some way, Odin never died, nor did Huginn or Muninn or any of the gods of mythos, Norse or otherwise. Perhaps that's why we tell our own stories, so that one day, when our own Ragnarok comes, whatever it may be, we too will endure, even if in story, even if just in thought and memory.
Another massive thank you to Raven Reads for narrating this episode of Art and Lore for us again today. Be sure to check out her latest episode of Art and Lore, which will be linked in the video description and in the end card at the end of the video. If you're still confused as to what Art and Lore is, me and Raven basically pick a topic of folklore. We each create our own art piece, and Raven Reads is kind enough to narrate each one. Hence the name, Art and Lore. Raven and I are always constantly looking for inspiration for our next Art and Lore piece and episode, so if you have any suggestions, please leave them down in the comment section. I know I, for one, will be very curious to see which episodes you guys would like to see next. I was also very happy with how this piece turned out and decided to turn it into a phone wallpaper for you all. So if you would like to get your hands on this free phone wallpaper, be sure to head over to kellipaints.com and sign up for my email list, and you will get the password to the seller where this and other wallpapers are available for free download. I'd like to say thank you so much again for watching. And until next time, don't stop believing.